Welcome to Aspire to Lead, where we empower educators and school leaders to grow, inspire, and thrive. I'm your host, Joshua Stamper, author, speaker, and leadership coach, bringing you conversations that spark transformation, challenge the status quo in education, and equip you to make a lasting impact on your campus or in your district. For more information and resources, visit joshstamper.com as we're looking to ascend to new leadership heights together. All right, we are back. Thank you so much for being with us for Aspire to Lead. And I have a wonderful guest, Katie Powell, who I had the wonderful opportunity not only to be connected with for years, but also to have on a short interview and be in her presence for the NCMLE conference. And it was such a joy to get to know Katie, as she's just a brilliant speaker, educator, leader, and someone who's just a really kind-hearted person. So with that, Katie, thank you so much for being on Aspire to Lead.
Well, thank you. That was a very kind intro. What a way to elevate my day. Thank you for that.
Well, if you take anything from this conversation, hopefully it's that. And so it was a joy to be able to see you interact with other educators, speak, and then, we got to do a book signing together. And then also just a little tidbit for folks. We've got bonus episodes from the NCMLE conference. I'm posting those each week. Katie is a part of these bonus episodes. So you're going to want to check out that quick little conversation. They're just little tidbit, 5-6 minute conversations, just talking with our brilliant speakers, what their topics were, and the services that they're providing all over this country. So with that, Katie, do you want to share a little bit about yourself in regards to your educational leadership journey?
Sure. I'm currently the Association for Middle Level Education's Director for Middle Level Programs, which is a mouthful of a title, meaning I get to work for an ed nonprofit that supports middle school educators. So my job is to do the professional development support and programmatic support for those educators, which is such a blessing of a job when you get to support educators, specifically middle school educators full time. Wow. But my journey here started was a classroom teacher for many, many years. I did middle school special education for nearly a decade, and then Title I in both elementary and middle school, and sixth grade ELA in both elementary and middle school settings. And I was still madly in love with teaching when this job came my way. I didn't hit burnout. The constant creativity, content creation, etc. of teaching, I was still absolutely thrilled with. But I'd been a teacher member of AMLE my entire career, super engaged, involved in any committee or project they'd let me be on, presenting for their conferences. And so when this job was being created and I had the opportunity to apply, I just decided you can't walk through doors you don't open. So if I applied and the answer was no, nothing changed. I kept doing a job I loved. Oh, the only thing I was risking was maybe a little pride and some of the time and effort to put this stuff together. So I decided to go ahead and take those steps. And, now I find myself nearly 5 years on the job with AMLE, still madly in love with this job.
Well, I got my AMLE sticker. It's now on my laptop. So
Excellent.
I've known of that organization forever, and it was something that was familiar seeing you. I think they were a sponsor of the book signing area,
Yes.
correct? And then, of course, seeing you in action was awesome. So let's talk about the middle school realm. I love middle school. In fact, I was almost in that space for 20 years. And so typically when I tell folks that I was a middle school teacher or throughout my journey, middle school administrator, most folks gave me, especially in Texas, the bless your heart.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm curious for you why you chose specifically that area and why you fell in love with it.
Yeah, well, bless your heart is a kind one. Usually it's you're crazy or you're a saint.
Yes.
There's nothing in between. We're either end of the spectrum. When I was in college preparing to be a teacher, the program I was in had you apply to be in the teacher ed program your second year of college. And it was a big portfolioed interview, a tremendous amount of stress and pressure around this process to be accepted into the teacher ed program. And I remember one of the questions they asked is if I wanted to teach students like me. And I was a very driven and motivated student. I'd graduated high school early. I was a young person in college. I was accelerating my college program, and I'd never considered what like me meant, let alone if I wanted to teach kids like myself. And so I caught myself reflecting live during that question on what that even means and do I envision myself doing for a living. And I realized in that conversation that I would have learned on my own without a teacher if I had to. I was curious, wanted to know how things work. I wanted to learn. You could have put me in a library and I would have eventually discovered something. I knew that wasn't true for all students, and I was really driven to be the kind of educator that those students would need. That if school wasn't a place they loved to be, and if they weren't driven to learn, how could we ignite that in their brains? That's such an exciting and empowering feeling when you get lit up with curiosity over something. And so that concept, kind of the portrait of a learner that I had in my mind, and also the perception that middle school is typically people's least favorite stage of life. Like for many of us, you couldn't pay us to go on a field trip back to our middle school selves. So, that idea that when you would ask people in the teacher ed program, like, what grade do you want to teach? Who do you want to work with? It's like, oh, I want to be a third grade teacher. There weren't many people being like, I want to teach middle school. So there was a little cohort of like 3 of us that were like, yes, we want to be middle school teachers. So I think I found myself driven to the challenge of that stage of life and just wanting to show up as an adult of care and creativity and respect for how messy and complicated that stage of life could be. I found myself driven to middle school because I knew that we needed good teachers there, that not anyone could walk in and do that job, that it really was going to demand my best at all times, and it certainly did.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's talk about the support, because obviously you're helping middle school teachers now and educators. So middle schoolers are complex. They're going through a lot of development. There's a awkward stage of life there. They're navigating who they are and trying to figure out their identity, and also just depending more on like that peer relationship. So when you're working with teachers, how are you helping them understand the unique environment and then also what that age group needs?
Yeah, we start those conversations with young adolescent development. If we understand who our students are in this stage of life, then that is the filter by which we say yes and no to things. So that becomes our why for everything. And that starts with things like understanding that out of infancy, this is the greatest rate of change our minds and bodies experience in human development. That neuroplasticity, the way the brain is rewiring in early adolescence, is this absolutely wonderful window of change. That our essentially permanent self-concept is starting to develop in this stage, that in this stage of life, we're seeking and craving more agency over ourselves while we have prefrontal cortices that have just started to develop. So we want control and have no idea what to do with it. So, that tension in this stage of development is remarkable. But one of the things that I think anyone who's spent time with a middle schooler will have observed is there's a developmental phenomenon of feeling almost like simultaneously invisible and on display. Like, no one knows who I am. No one understands me. Oh my gosh, don't look at me. And so understanding there's this concept sometimes in education, especially when we look at like some of the politicization of our profession and everything, that teachers should get to quote unquote just teach. And that idea sometimes comes from a belief that they're supporting educators by saying that we are deliverers of content. We should just be able to focus on those standards. But there's also the phrase on the other end of that conversation, you have to Maslow before you can bloom. And in the world of middle school education, especially, if we're not addressing the developmental experience of our students, they cannot learn from us. Just the way the brain works, if they're coming to us with elevated experiences of stress, discomfort, lack of security and safety, then the parts of their brain that we need to be lit up and ready to learn cannot turn on. So we have to know this about our students as we shape our professional decision making. Out of that, my organization has identified 5 essential attributes and 18 characteristics of successful middle schools from a meta-analysis of research. We update this every few years, and then we're able to work with schools and educators on what that looks like in practice in their own buildings or classrooms.
That's awesome. I'm going to find that. I'll link that in the show notes for folks too, because I think that would be extremely helpful information, especially having each of those components there that they can look through. So
Definitely.
Let's go a little bit further, because middle schoolers are an interesting breed. And so in regards to engagement and motivation, what are some of the most effective strategies that you either have used or seen other teachers use to capture the students' interests and, of course, the engagement piece?
Well, you told me we're going to be about 30 minutes here, which means we're not likely to solve that entire scenario in a few minutes together. But
Talk
I think
really fast, Katie.
I already do. A few talking points I guess I could give. One is that I'm seeing an absence of space for curiosity. And curiosity lights the brain up. We need a reason to be learning something. If you follow like Philip Schlechty's levels of engagement, the concept that so many of our students camp out at either disengagement or that like ritual compliance stage where they might be completing work, they might be turning things in, but if the brain is not lit up with that work, they may not even be learning it. We might be in a behavior of following along and doing what an adult tells us to do, but it might not be going anywhere. And I'll tell you, there isn't a teacher out there right now who isn't working really daggone hard to do their job every day, planning these bell-to-bell strategies. Here they are working really hard, and yet we have students whose brains might not be able to receive that. So when we look at what does that mean to like foster an optimum brain state for learning, research has long summarized the optimum brain state for learning as relaxed alertness. So a student needs to feel safe. We need to be able to lower levels of stress so that the amygdala can calm down, but we need that prefrontal cortex, the learning regions of the brain, to be alert. We got to light them up. So, although that sounds like an oxymoron to be relaxed and alert at the same time, we're talking about the way the regions of the brain work and the kind of chemistry that's involved in this. And some of the really great news is that one of the best ways to foster that brain state is through fun and humor. When we are feeling playful, when we're laughing, those experiences of enjoyment, the chemistry our brains release during that time and our bodies release during that time lower stress hormones and elevate chemicals that are involved in activating attention and memory. So something as simple as part of your Bellwork strategies, including a brief, funny video that you've carefully pre-screened so something inappropriate doesn't play when your administrator walks in for your unscheduled observation. Moments of sensory experiences. Sometimes we got to bring the energy level down, especially like our post-lunch class will come to us like wild little sea monkeys. So maybe we do a moment of classroom yoga. We got to work with the nervous systems of our students so that they can be learners in our spaces. And then the other part of that, talking about, okay, we fostered the optimum brain state for learning. How do we keep the brain lit up then, that engagement piece of it? And there's kind of a formula any human's brain is working to decide whether or not they're going to engage in something. And, students aren't self-aware that this is what their brain is doing, but some kids come to us already valuing our content or the process of school. So they cross the threshold into your classroom and they're going to do what you tell them to do because they care about their grades or they care about school or they care about conjugating verbs. And so they come to you already with value. That doesn't catch all of our students. So for the rest, when you put work in front of them, they're considering how hard am I going to have to work to engage in this? And then what is my risk of either failing or not being good at something once I get started? And if that equation works out in such a way that they're going to have to work hard and there's a risk of failing or not being good at it, they won't engage. So where we have a lot of leverage is with these task characteristics. How shiny and attractive can we make the task? Can we leverage novelty and curiosity and playful pedagogy and all of these other things where it won't feel like there's such a high barrier to engagement and participation?
So does that work with task avoidance also?
I think so. With task avoidance, some of what we're seeing, it's a very complex reality because although it presents like similar behaviors, that we have students who sit at their desk and won't pick up their pencil, they're actually rebelling against doing what we tell them to do. We have other students who pick up that pencil and doodle in the margin. So when we're cleaning the room, it looks like they're working, they're not. We have other kids who come to class unprepared so that they can, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have my Chromebook. I guess I can't do that today. Quietly opt out. Regardless of where that reason for opting out comes from, our mediation strategies would really ideally address some of those whys behind it. But for a number of our young people today, they really are risk averse. That concept of if I'm going to have to try and I'm not good at this, and what that feels like to do that over and over again all day, every day at school, and know you're just going to have to keep doing that until you're someday old enough to drop out or graduate, that's a really discouraging state to be in. So this does help support, I think, this kind of task avoidance, the sense of inertia. But I think that's a larger and more complex conversation too around how students view themselves, what kind of buy-in they have to school, the kinds of classroom management and behavior response strategies we're using as the adults in those scenarios, how quickly we label behavior and start talking consequences, how often I get asked for non-graded work, for me to advocate for a school that non-graded things like doing their iReady, can you tell our administration that that needs to be graded because the kids won't do it if it's not for a grade? And I'm sorry, the kids who aren't going to do it aren't going to do it whether it has a grade or not. So, we are hearing the groan. We know that this is a pain point for the adults in school environments, but also for students themselves. Our current generation of students are describing themselves as highly stressed. Chronic stress is not good for our brains and bodies, especially while we are developing human beings. So we know we have to get on top of this. I think what we're finding is that there are not quick and easy solutions here, that instead, this is a multifaceted problem that is going to need multifaceted responses.
In addition of stress, there's sometimes academic stamina that's lost with our middle school students. I know especially our young sixth graders going in that are used to a different model are overwhelmed. Is there any things that you help teachers with in regards to academic stamina and executive functioning, like similar things to what you were talking about before?
Yeah, again, big concept. Don't
Yep.
think we'll crack the whole system in the time we have together, but a couple of things I could name. One is that sometimes we're the reason academic stamina isn't developing. Because, well, here's a case in point. I noticed this about myself as a teacher when we shifted to online learning during COVID, because I had a system in my physical classroom where the agenda and objective were posted, everything we were going to do, it was on the board, and students would still walk in and go, what are we doing today? And I would point to the board like, there you go, there's the answer. What this looked like when we shifted virtual is that I would post the directions for everything on Google Classroom. I would record a video of myself explaining everything, and I would give exemplars, and everything would be available to students. And the minute I unlocked it, the first comments I'm getting back are, what are we supposed to do? And I realized then that I had created a system where I am the keeper of information. Working with a friend of mine, her son was struggling in second grade. He wasn't qualifying for any kind of learning disability. And my friend was like, would you just work with him to find out, your perceptions? What do you think's going on? So we're doing math homework together, and I'm watching him just put numbers on the paper, like not actually work anything out. And I was like, can you tell me about this? And he goes, well, in class, when I get work to do, I put a number on the paper and I take it to my teacher, and she goes, that's not right, try again. And I go back and I erase it and I put another number down and I take it back to my teacher, and she goes, that's not right, try again. And I take it back to my desk, I erase it, I put another number down, and eventually she'll tell me what the number should be. That we are creating a lack of stamina by rescuing. And I don't know that we even know that we do it, because we're just trying to keep everything afloat, right? So I think one of the things we can be doing to develop academic stamina is really fostering some grapple time, that we train students about the procedure and what this is going to look like, and we train ourselves to not be rescuers, that we start small, maybe just 3 minutes of grapple time where you give an assignment and you go through, what are your resources? If I could not rescue you when you didn't know something, what would you do? Skip it, move on to another problem, use your textbook, ask a friend, like whatever your expectations are, you go through, you make sure everyone's got it good. Now for 3 minutes, I'm not helping you and you can't stop. So use your resources and keep going. And then we can grow that stamina over time, where students aren't coming to us like little Velcro students to be our, fosterers of really, how often does a kid come to you and go, is this good? Am I doing this right? Like, they need to develop confidence that isn't dependent on another person. So we are growing not just the skills of actually being able to sustain attention, solve problems, use resources, etc., but we're actually developing the confidence that's going to self-feed this and keep students going longer and further.
All right, I want to talk about something that's in early stages, because I think this ties into this topic. But you are working on a concept for book number 3. I'd love to, one, break that open in front of my audience and let folks know that this is occurring and they need to get this resource when it comes out. But, just as far as the problem that you're seeing and the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, you know this, having written books, like it's like having a child. It's a tremendous commitment of time. Other people, like you have an editing team that gets involved. So you got people you can't let down. You've got deadlines to meet. And man, keeping life afloat is sometimes hard. So I've been rolling this idea around for a while and not really doing a whole lot about it. Like, I started to get the little prospectus together and then I stopped because I got I got scared about the time commitment. And you have previously used the term, were you getting itchy about it? And yeah, I'm at the point now that this is uncomfortable. I'm going to have to make it happen. So, what I'm looking at exploring with book 3 is this scenario of the task avoidance and lack of academic stamina. In the vein of the other work I've done, we'll start with understanding research on a teacher level. This isn't me being a psychologist or something or a neuroscientist, but research at a teacher level about what is going on with our students and with our academic system that's fostering this problem, what's happening behind the scenes when we see a student in, task avoidance, what might be happening, behind the scenes, but then really lean into the tangible strategies that if you are one of those educators who is doing your best to engage a hard to engage generation, I mean, you're competing against TikTok attention spans. So if you're in that scenario and you have students that are resistant to picking up their pencil and getting started, or they get started and they just need you, they can't keep going, they don't know how to face challenges. We have really bright and intelligent students who aren't pushing themselves because they're uncomfortable with the discomfort of learning. Then the rest of the book will focus on what can we do to help get students moving and then keep them moving once they get there in really tangible and applicable ways. So right now it's some ideas on paper, a lot in my head. A lot of research needs to happen before I can, officially get this submitted and maybe eventually be under contract. But yeah, I'm at the point that I'm committed. It needs to happen.
The reason I equated itchiness is because I'm feeling that right now. So I have some ideas percolating with my co-author, Charle Peck. So in the future, we can talk about that more too. But I want to go back to your other 2 books, which are phenomenal resources for folks. We got Boredom Busters and Frustration Busters. So we just talk through those also. I'm, of course, going to link those into the show notes and then have it on my website, joshtyper.com, for folks to make sure that they grab their copy. But for the 2 books, will you just share a little bit about those?
So I didn't have any intention of becoming an edu author. Instead, years ago, when I was a Title I teacher, a call for proposals for the AMLE annual conference came out, and I kept that email open on my desktop for a week without doing anything about it. And I was like, oh, I'd love to do that. But a line kept running through my head where I would tell myself, but I'm just a teacher. And I closed down all the windows on my computer, at the end of every day and would see that sitting there on my screen and be like, oh, but I'm just a teacher. And finally, at the end of the week, I had an epiphany where, it's the same mentality that I wound up eventually applying when this job came available, that if I submit a proposal and the answer is no, all I have risked is a little bit of my pride and my time. So why not try? So I started with a little 15-minute speed learning session. You repeat 3 times to different groups of people. And I was taking some of the strategies I'd been doing with my students, having spent most of my career working with kids that aren't inherently successful at school. And I called it Prep Once Activities, a really sexy title. And I wound up with, I think, like 45 people gathered around my little 8-person table at some point. And Drew Tomlin, who worked for AMLE at the time, was like, hey, have you thought about doing like an actual concurrent session for this? And I was like, man, you're lucky I got here. Like one thing at a time. But I started presenting more and more, and teachers would say, hey, if you had a website, I could refer to this when I go home. So I'm like, great. So I built the Teach Beyond the Desk website. Y'all, it's awful. I made it myself using Wix. It is not pretty. There are broken links in there, but it exists and it's free. So you can go find things. And so I was still doing the presentations, and people were like, hey, if you had a book, I could take it with me. And I'm like, but I made the website. And they're like, yeah, how about a book? And at the same time, I was kind of being headhunted a little bit by a couple of publishers who had been in some of my sessions and asked if I'd ever thought about writing, and really developed a commitment to this being a take and use resource for educators, not a research treatise on engagement, but instead something that they could pull off their shelf, flip to any page, and use what they see there without asking more of teachers' time, money, etc. So Boredom Busters really focuses on teacher zone of proximal development, that we have our comfort zone and there's a target, like the language and professional evaluation rubrics for teachers uses language like 3/4 or more of students are actively engaged in work that is relevant and meaningful to them at all times. whew, that's a huge target. So starting with where we're comfortable and knowing that's where we need to get, what does one step out of our comfort zone look like? So for many educators, things that we use and do routinely that are already part of our adopted curriculum, so it's safe for us to do, we're not having to learn to teach a different way, just that worksheet you would use, what if we deploy it a different way? Turn it into a paper airplane and launch it around the room instead of handing it directly into the teacher. These very simple, small, safe shifts that move us toward that level of engagement that's expected of our profession now without having to abandon our own teaching style, our own resources, etc. So that's what Boredom Busters is. It's all quick, easy to implement, but rooted in really strong pedagogy and neuroscience. Then Frustration Busters came along because people started asking, hey, when are you writing another book? And I'm like, listen, I did that. Like, no intention to write another, but had an experience with my colleagues where we realized we were all feeling like failures, and yet we were like the dream team. We were all veteran educators. We're all effective or highly effective on our rubric. Like, we were the ones to pilot things for our district. And so if we're walking around without a strong sense of efficacy, and we're us, like, what does that say about our profession? And when we were unpacking where that feeling came from, it was things like, it's March and they're coming to class with dead Chromebooks and no chargers, and we have 2 outlets anyway, waiting till 25 minutes into class to be like, I don't have a pencil, when you have a whole pencil system. We were hearing each other talk about what sounds like very low-level classroom management stuff. And it was chipping away at our sense of efficacy because it doesn't get better. You've, been doing it for a long time and you're seeing the same things happen. In fact, it might even seem to be like spreading, growing, increasing. And it's daunting. It's exhausting our mental energy to figure out how to solve all these micro problems all day, every day, while also teaching. And so Frustration Busters is meant to look at classroom management and student behavior. The phrase we often use with behavior is doing what's best for kids. Yes, but, or yes, and that's also a professional educator's workspace. So if we're not paying attention to their emotional response to student behavior, we might be finding solutions that work for kids and are not sustainable for the adult, or don't address the adult sense of frustration, because frustration puts us in fight, flight, fawn, or freeze too. So that's really what the book is full of. There's a flowchart system to help you see what needs addressed now versus what waits. And then when you go to address it, how do we offer a bunch of different possible solutions that do meet the underlying need for the student, but also honor the values a teacher may be bringing to that exchange as well. There's not a single right way to handle pencils. So instead, here's the spectrum, and you find yourself in that.
Well, I just want to say the statement "just a teacher" has killed so many great opportunities and ideas. And I'm so glad you pushed back on that idea, that statement, and went forward with the work that you're doing, because I know it's impacting so many folks.
Well,
And
thank
so
you.
I want to end on a recommendation from you. So I say this every episode. I'm so glad folks are tuning in, but I want them to have an actionable item. So for aspiring or current leaders who are listening, there's one thing that they could do tomorrow, next week, to enhance their leadership journey. Katie, what would you recommend?
I tell you, one of the things I've been working on for a while, and in my role, we have professional and personal goals that we meet on as part of our evaluation process. And my personal goal for years had been that I needed better work-life balance. And it occurred to me around a year ago that balance is binary. It assumes that in my life, I just have 2 things. I have work and I have home. And yet there are times that my kids' needs are bigger or less, or maybe I've got a friendship I want to invest more in versus less, or a really cool pleasure trip that's not a work trip and it's going to take me away from home, but daggone it, what a cool opportunity. I want to do it. And I realized balance was putting pressure on myself that wasn't necessary and wasn't capturing the actual experience of being a human being. And I decided instead that it's more like proportions. The old my plate diagram, how it was like you got a plate and you need to have different kinds of things on it, that a healthy human being's plate has professional things, has home things like the caretaking of your home and members of your family, your recreational choices. When the weather's nice, I want to be hitting a trail somewhere or laying in a hammock in the sunshine. Maybe I'm not vacuuming the floor when I'm in the hammock in the sunshine, but I am a better human being if I get 20 minutes in the sunshine. So I gave myself permission to stop thinking in binary terms and instead think about the proportions of things in my life, and that there's ebb and flow. And sometimes there's more or less of one or another, and making sure that I keep some presence of the things that make me healthy and account for the times when something might be taking up more or less space, that I revisit those proportions on the backside of whatever that demand was. So I would say if you're someone in leadership, you're carrying burdens that are not your own. They're on your mind and heart and shoulders all the time. So giving yourself permission to look at the proportions and actually itemize this, weigh it out. What's on your time and energy demand right now? Time and energy are finite resources. You only have so much of it to go around. And consider the proportions. Where are they now and where do you want them to be? And what action steps do you need to take to actually have healthier proportions of those things in your life? Bartering yourself to the sake of a job or a leadership role is not going to be good for anyone. You got to be a healthy human being. Invest in yourself first before you can expect yourself to show up for other people.
Yeah, excellent advice. So I want Katie to have folks not only go to your website, which I've been flashing up on the screen for those who are watching on YouTube, but I'd also like them to connect with you on social media. So where can they find you?
I'm on X at Beyond the Desk with underscores in between, and Instagram at Teach Beyond the Desk with underscores in between. So those are the best places to find me on social media. They do need to know, though, I'm bad at social media. So I'm not an ed influencer. It's like videos of the flying squirrels visiting my nighttime camera out on the deck and the golden retriever stealing things from my house and what concerts I'm going to and the occasional edu content. So
Sure.
They're following the real human being, Katie Powell, not some sort of professional image of Katie Powell.
Gotcha. Well, that's a good caveat, but we'll have all the links for folks and they can choose from the buffet of links there, including, of course, the books will be on the show notes and on my website. So make sure you're checking everything out that Katie has her hands on. She is a brilliant individual and someone who's going to give a lot of resources and tactics, strategies for you in the classroom, and especially our middle school educators. Make sure that you're following Katie. And if you have any questions, reach out to her. She will definitely get back to you on anything that you have as far as problems is going on in your world. And with that, Katie, I just wanted to thank you so much for connecting, but then also all the phenomenal work that you're doing in the world of education.
Well, likewise, it's a strange thing that in this world of education where it's a small world. So many of us are connected online for years before we actually get to meet in person as human beings. And that was the case for us. So to get to actually, share meals together with you and other presenters and sit side by side at events and get to see some of our edu friends in action in their sessions, what a tremendous blessing that is. So thank you for just being a genuine human being out there doing this work and doing it well.
Thank you so much.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.